hope you know what you're doing.
So do I.
Hi and welcome to Marvelous Videos with myself, Mystical Blue, your host. From the late 70s to the 80s, the world of science fiction was rejuvenated and vivified by Star Wars, which began as a space opera film but later turned into George Lucas's multimedia franchise, giving the genre a whole new standard. Since Star Wars made its debut, a plethora of imaginative originals came to be consummated into this newly explored genre, alongside a brazen tenor of lame knockoffs simply trying to hitch a profitable ride, aiding the success of the Star Wars franchise. Although there are many rip-off or inspired films that stood a chance at Star Wars glory in giving science fiction films a fresher outtake, there still are an underrated few which could be debated as diamonds in the rough. One such underrated diamond is Star Chaser, The Legend of Orrin, which to this date remains a hidden gem and is barely discussed. This 1985 release is said to be an unbiased rip-off of George Lucas's Star Wars, but if carefully observed, it's more of a Star Wars inspired film than it is a cheap knockoff. Innumerable movies following in the footsteps of the Star Wars saga at the time were limited by a severe lack of vision and, of course, a menial budget, thus failing to achieve the much needed effect on its viewers, rendering every other end product as an uninspired piece of a brazenly copied knockoff. But Star Chaser, The Legend of Orrin, allowed its top-graded, marvelous animation to push it up towards a height that made it stand out from its cohorted live-action Star Wars-influenced movies, and not to mention the Star Wars inspired characters really are a major cut above the rest. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, let's begin. Exploring this well-crafted Star Wars ripoff. Although proclaimed as a bootleg version of the Star Wars franchise, Star Chaser: The Legend of Orrin has its own cult following. This animated film heavily borrowed its concept from the legendary Star Wars universe, heavy metal, wizards, rock and roll, and Battle Beyond the Stars, but on some essential parts, this animated film stood out for retaining tidbits of originality, be it Cecilia's bold and opinionated persona, or how the concept of the sword blade magically came through to rescue when needed the most. Weirdly enough, most animated movies at the time were focused on being a kid-centric, but the kind of edge Star Chaser: The Legend of Orrin incorporates makes it a little too dark for a kid's movie. Released a good few years after the original Star Wars saga Return of the Jedi was wrapped up, this movie even jeered for it in its tagline, "The search for the Force is over, and the adventure begins." Although rotoscope animation never lived to see the end of today's world, adult-orientated animated films like Star Chaser: The Legend of Orrin made the best out of it, as it was one of the first ever animated films to be formatted into 3D. Rotoscope animation was famously used by visionaries like Ralph Bakshi and Walt Disney, wherein real actors acted from a film script, which was later animated over to incorporate more fluid and human-like motions. Star Chaser: The Legend of Orrin clubbed traditional animation with computer animation to produce the first Star Wars-inspired animated movie with power-packed live action and crazy character animations. The plot of Star Chaser: The Legend of Orrin explores the fictional planet named Trinia, set in the Andromeda Galaxy. Trinia is overrun by a self-proclaimed god who goes by the name of Zygon and overlooks a huge population of human slaves living in the shadows of underground mines for over a millennium. These slaves dig the mine for crystals day in and day out to save themselves from the wrath of Zygon, who addresses the slave crew at the end of each day to inspect the crystal collection and reward them with food enough to survive. Zygon is set on a higher pedestal as the slaves bow down to him, while he appears amidst the visuals of raging fumes wearing an extremely creepy looking headgear with long horns and spooky eyes. These human slaves are corrected and monitored by the mind masters of Zygon's robot minions with laser whips. Zygon has manipulated the human population of the mines so that their lives are limited to digging crystals and serving their god. There is no world above the mining world, and the world above is hell adjacent. A young miner by the name of Orrin finds a strange but elegant sword embedded amidst a heap of large rocks and shows it to his girlfriend, Aelan. Hops, Aelan's grandfather, who has given his entire life to digging crystals, immediately recognizes the sword and asks Orrin to keep it hidden. One of the robot minions comes their way when he sees them not working and finds the sword in Orrin's possession. Hops tries to kill the robot and dies a very, very gory death when one of the minions uses a laser whip on his neck, killing killing him almost immediately. Hops dies a very sad death, begging Oren to keep the existence of the sword a secret. This death fuels our hero with rage, and thus his adventure begins. Upon taking the sword in his hand, Oren is perplexed when the sword mounts up in the air and buries its blade into the mine's floor. Immediately after, a projection of an old bearded man, all clad in white, appears from the blade, as if he was leaving a message. The message from the robed old man spoke of a magnificent world above the mining world, and that the bearer of the sword must find the blade and lead the people of the cavern out to this world above, free from the world of the diggers. Immediately after, the blade vanishes into thin air and leaves behind just the bejeweled golden hilt of the sword. Oren tries to encourage his fellow miners in rebelling against Zygon in search of the world above, but a few diggers deem the sword's message as manipulative propaganda, as they were clearly brainwashed into thinking that the world above is hell and that the cavern is their true home of redemption. Oren is compelled to leave his young blind brother Callie behind, as the journey might be dangerous, and sets out in search of the world beyond, with Aelan, escaping the troop of mindless robots and killing most of them with laser guns. Chased by these stupid robots, both Oren and Aelan elope in a wheelbarrow train carrying the crystals and emerge into a factory-like industrial complex where they are met by the real Zygon. They quickly find out that Zygon is a conman who is in reality a human beneath that edgy, terrifying mask. Zygon stands taller than everyone in the room and asks them to prepare to meet the same fate as the slave who found out the real truth about him 1200 years ago. Zygon strangles Aelan to death in front of Oren's eyes, but Oren manages to save his life and escapes into the cave when Zygon is distracted by the golden hilt. Oren is presumed dead when the robot minions fire on a crystal deposit near the cave, resulting in an explosion, causing it to dismantle the entire cave. Luckily, Oren escaped into the cave with a laser gun, which he digs towards the surface of Trinia that would lead him to the world above. Oren's eyes well up when he successfully reaches out of the cave and takes a long look at the stars, but this moment is short-lived because soon after he is captured by a group of half-decaying, half-robotic weirdos. These mandroids intend to dismember each of their young and fresh body parts and use them to replace their own mechanic robot parts. This is where the prop protagonist of the movie, the sword, comes first to Oren's rescue, as the golden hilt flashes an invisible blade, swiftly chopping off the mandroids in gruesome halves and aiding Oren's escape from their clutches. A few moments later, Oren is met with a human smuggler by the name of Dag Dibrimi. Dag tries to investigate Oren's whereabouts to learn if he's another smuggler and dubs him by the name Watersnake when Oren tells Dag about his world, who does not believe it, as the mines of Trinia are supposedly dug by Zygon's robots. In a rift, Oren charges the hilt towards Dag, but it does not work. The pair is met by robots and spaceships on the round, and both take turns saving each other's lives. Dag takes Oren along with him in his Star Chaser and steals a boatload of crystals from a levitating freighter, where Oren again meets Zygon. They barely escape the fight, and Dag steals a fembot, who he had used as a shield to save himself from the laser blasts. Silica, the fembot, came with a side of arrogance and was later reprogrammed by Dag, which resulted in her being obnoxiously attached to him. Zygon realizes who Oren really is as he witnesses Oren use the hilt's invisible blade. This scene also introduces a mysterious starfly who grows attached to Oren and follows him. The next scene takes us to the planet of Wardagon, in the city of Toga Toga, where Dag abandons Oren for good and takes Silica to be sold out at the slave market. Oren listlessly wanders through the city, looking for any clue that would lead him to the hilt's blade, and crosses paths with a fortune teller who asks him to go to a place called Nova Luna. Oren then wanders to the slave market, where he sees Silica being auctioned without any knowledge of how the ways of the world work. Oren bids on the highest price until Silica is sold to him. When the auctioneer finds out about Oren's lack of knowledge of currency, he charges Oren his freedom in exchange for Silica's, but when Dag finds out, his conscience does not allow him to let both of them off, and he pays to free them both. The Star Chaser then takes us to a desert where Dag and Oren meet two merchants who are set to buy Dag's stolen crystals. Because of the price placed upon Oren's head by Zygon, the merchant offers to buy Oren, but Dag straight up refuses. As a retaliation, the merchants hide a ticking time bomb in Dag's box of payment. The Starfly comes to rescue as he warns the crew crew of the bomb, which helps them throw the box back into the merchant's tent. Later, Dag agrees to take Oren to Nova Luna, but all their plans come to a big halt when Zygon's robot soldiers shoot down the Star Chaser. This renders Arthur, the artificial intelligence behind the ship's merceneering, inactive. Dag is carried back to Zygon for strict interrogation, whereas Oren is nowhere to be found. Later, Oren's body is seen hanging on a tree, where he is found by the daughter of Bordegon's governor, Aviana. She carries him back to her castle and nurses him back to Hel. Oren wakes up and tells her the story of his origin and of the Golden Hilt. Aviana recognizes the hilt from her planetary history lessons and takes to her computer to find out more about the matter. Upon research, it is revealed that the Golden Hilt has been anciently used by a group of heroic guardians to vanquish threats to humanity time and time again. These guardians went by the name of Kharkan and defeated tyrants like Nexus, after whose demise the Golden Hilt annihilated until Oren discovered it. Aviana makes the impulse headstrong decision of taking Oren back to Trinia without even letting anyone know of it. Oren tries to kill Zygon with the hilt as revenge for Aelin's death, but only manages to injure his face, revealing the robot masked as a human who proclaimed himself as the god of the slaves. This duel reveals Zygon as Nexus, who is steadily taking over humanity with his army of robots. The Golden Hilt is seized and Aviana and Oren are thrown into a cell as prisoners beside Dag, who was already captured, while Zygon quickly coordinates on attack with his robo army. While Aviana confesses her true feelings towards Oren in the prison, she is taken away by robot minions to be held hostage at Zygon's flagship. Meanwhile, the Starfly aids to Oren's rescue as it carries the Golden Hilt to him, which he uses to free Dag and himself. Both of them enter Zygon's flagship to take full control of it and fully take the fleet of robot enemies, aided by the very helpful Starfly. Before penetrating Zygon's base, Oren and Dag are united with Celica, who has fixed Arthur, the sassy artificial intelligence, and restored the Star Chaser. When attacked by the troops of Zygon's base, Dag and Celica stay back to fight them off, while Oren enters his previous home, the Mine World, and takes to the pedestal to castigate and revile Zygon to the diggers until he is interrupted by Zygon himself. They fight until Zygon holds Aviana by her neck and ensures that she would meet the same fate as Aelin if Oren did not give him the Golden Hilt. Oren was forced to surrender, and Zygon throws him off, leaving him hanging over a chasm. As Zygon gloats about his tyranny, 3 Starflies appear, merging into one, and assure Oren that the hilt is just a prop that is fueled by his subconsciousness, as the true power to create a cutting force originates from Oren himself. This motivates the Superman in Oren to pull himself up and create a cutting force from within, which leaves Zygon petrified. Oren cuts Zygon into 2 halves and throws him to his doom into the lava pit below. This encourages the miners to finally fight for their freedom and make their way with Oren to the world above. Meanwhile, Celica fires a heavy blast of laser from the Star Chaser into a huge heap of accumulated crystals, causing them to detonate and triggering a massive chain reaction that aids in the collapse of the mines. Luckily, Oren has superpowers now, which he uses to cut an opening that leads Oren and his people to the surface of Trinia. In the world above, Kali's blindness is healed with Oren's newfound divine powers, and he is rejoined with Ivania, Celica, and Dag. A trio of Starflies then reveal themselves as the spirits of the previous Kharkan. They are invited to leave his human form and join their crew, but he refuses and chooses to live a human life with his friends. The movie ends with the ancient spirits of the Kharkan leaving Oren behind and merging with the stars above. What made this project stand out? The biggest reason which made the Star Chaser project stand out was definitely the amalgamation of modern computerized animation with that of the traditional one. For an animated movie of the 80s, Star Chaser: The Legend of Oren was ahead of its time, not to forget the darkness of the plot, which pushes it towards being more of an adult's cartoon than a kid's movie. It could easily be dubbed as the version of Star Wars which took a darker turn. Directed and animated by Young Sung Productions under the wing of Steve M. Han, Star Chaser: The Legend of Oren incorporated a stellar voice cast besides a very advanced animation technique and story plot written by Jeffrey Scott. Although it devastatingly missed the rock and roll music feature like all its fellow live-action Star Wars influenced films, Star Chaser is set to a more traditional traditional, adventurous film score composed by Andrew Belling, who had also composed the score of the sci-fi animated feature Wizards. It is a no-brainer that the film capitalized its success on the Star Wars era phenomena. Oren is the coin flip-side character design of Luke Skywalker. Dag Dibrimi was an unabashed version of Han Solo, and Avarnia was designed to fill in Princess Leia's archetype. Even the sword that drives the entire plot across resembles the design of a lightsaber, not to forget the Obi-Wan Kenobi inspired hidden message delivered by an old bearded man from the blade of the sword. A heavy part of the film's art designs reflects more of a heavy metal and rock and roll visionary, with whimsical backdrops and horrid technologies. But the plot has its own moments of originalities, like the concept of the mandroid hunting humans for tearing their body parts apart for recycling them as their own, and the finesse by which it was articulated. Dag's relationship with his Star Chaser AI, Arthur, whose dynamic serves both as a Chewbacca and a C-3PO in terms of plot. There is also Celica, a fembot C-3PO, whose unique programming and disturbingly weird relationship with Dag was a newly explored dynamic in the 80s. It should also be noted that quite a few movies might have been inspired by Star Chasers, like the resemblance of Celica with Star Wars droids L3-37, Lando's droid from Solo, who had the exact unnerving attachment to Lando as Celica has to Dag. Even Zygon's demise by being cut into two halves predates Darth Maul's death in Star Wars The Phantom Menace, at least by a good 15 years. Lastly, the entire concept of the mandroid scene might have been reused in John Carpenter's Escape from LA, where an evil surgeon disembodies people into reusing their body parts. The movie's mature theme outtake and edgy sci-fi fantasy plot take it to a standpoint to allow it the pride in setting itself apart from the Star Wars visionary. Marvelous verdict, an ambitious project that will be cherished by all Star Wars fans. Star Chaser, The Legend of Oren successfully explores the animated world of technology overpowering humanity and the lengths of dreadful mishaps that could happen if humankind were fully driven by technology and the power it held, resulting in the formation of man-made robots trying to overtake the entire universe and wipe human existence off once and for all. It should be mentioned at every possible moment that Star Chaser, The Legend of Oren was the first animated film in the 80s to be formulated and released in 3D, and was truly ahead of its time. Even though it took a brazen joyride on the Star Wars phenomena, Star Chaser had visually stimulating animation, unique character design, stellar voice cast, and power-packed humour laced with action and adventure mixed with sci-fi fantasy, topped off with tidbits of violence. Star Chaser, The Legend of Oren portrayed the mind-boggling intensity of live action that can be achieved with the help of an animated feature as compared to visual live action features, limiting the very obvious in the 80s. It did borrow a major chunk of plot and character themes from the Star Wars franchise, but is largely an original film told via great animation. The matured sexual content laced with inappropriate jokes, gory themes of violence, and a truly dark story gave animated movies of the 80s a refreshing outtake, which was a very bold thing to do back in the day, alongside giving a much needed breather to the otherwise predictable plot. The stellar voice cast including Joe Colligan as Oren, Anthony DeLongez as Zygon, Carmen Argenziona as Dag Dibrimi, Noel North as Aelin and Avarnia, Les Tremayne as Arthur, and Taika Carvelli as Celica gave life to the plot's entire purpose. The old school CGI, the rogue sense of humour in Dag, the almighty robo-superior complex in Zygon, and the saviour complex in Oren to heroify every moment and seize it is what will keep you hooked on the film to the very end. Back in the 80s, Star Chasers was probably heavily misunderstood, and hence it slipped away into obscurity, as even though it had its cult fans, it was underrated by people who were aware of its existence. This movie is a book you cannot judge by the cover. The movie poster does no justice to give even a glimpse of the horrific sci-fi cut through the plot presents, from the gory scene with the mandroids to Dag fixing Celica by her butt to a young man Oren driven on conquest to foreign lands by a sword which seemed to a mind of its own that was connected to Oren's subconsciousness. This adult cartoon has reinvigorated animated adult themes in many forms. The typical storyline mixed with humorous mature themes added true depth to Star Chaser, The Legend of Oren, in addition to the film's brilliant animated live action schemes and character designs. Hopefully this video will entice you enough and give you a new perspective to finally explore this underrated underrated animated gem which really has so much more substance than being just a Star Wars knockoff. And for our viewers who are already cult fans of Star Chasers: The Legend of Orin, comment down your favourite scene from the movie in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.